we are trying some, well, I'm trying some new format this time. This is an experiment. We changed formats in the course of the years a few times. We begin the conference like most conferences go. A person gives a speech, and then afterwards, immediately, we had Q&A, questions and answer sessions. We changed that. First, we introduced the idea of having regular breaks between the speeches. I thought that was already a great improvement. Then the next change, again, for 2 years we were happy with that. And the next change we did, we postponed the questions and answer session at the end of the day where all speakers of the day appeared, because the initial format was sometimes people don't get any question at all, but then later on questions appear. So if the entire day goes by and all speakers sit on the panel, it turned out to be a better format. That's what we did up until this in this day. And then I came up with the idea I should just introduce a little change. And we will see how that works out. And this little change is I'm the moderator of a discussion among speakers on various topics. And we speak as long as we want on one topic and then go to the next topic. And the first topic that I want to talk about, and with the participation of my other fellows here, is of course Mr. Milei. The reason for that should be obvious, not that Argentina and Milei are all that important for the rest of the world, but after all, we are some sort of libertarian organization, and I should say we are a libertarian organization that is also culturally conservative. Many libertarians, you can forget about it. So we are a special form of libertarian organization. I try to imitate here something that existed in the United States for a while before I left the United States, a coalition between conservatively inclined people and libertarians, and the libertarians cooperating with the conservatives called themselves paleo-libertarians. So I myself belong to this group of paleo-libertarians. In any case, so now to the topic of Milei, and the reason for that is he has been hailed in Europe and to a lesser extent in the United States as some sort of new Jesus. There were German libertarian publications that refer to him as the libertarian world star. There was a book written before he even got to power, The Era of Milei. Normally you would just wait for about 100 years before you write a book about an era of somebody. But some daring Germans started an era before anybody ever did anything. That reminded me a little bit of Obama, who already received the Nobel Peace Prize before he started to kill the first person afterwards. So, as far as the world star status, libertarian world star status of Milei is concerned, I want to start something, and he referred to himself, of course, as an anarcho-capitalist. And before he came to power, two names were mentioned by him as his North Stars. One was my teacher, Murray Rothbard, and the other one was I myself. So I was his North Star. In the meantime, I'm probably his North Pole or Antarctica or something like this. I will not begin with his economic performance, which we will come to immediately, which is a disaster. But I will simply mention one thing that in my eyes disqualifies him from the outset to be even considered to be a libertarian. And that is his relationship that he has to Israel and especially to Netanyahu in person. He received a $1 million prize out of the hands of Netanyahu. He danced with Netanyahu in the streets while they were bombing the Gaza Strip. He excused everything that Israel does and still does as this is just self-defense. He hailed him as being a great liberal, despite the fact, as we have heard, that Israel is a socialist state. All land is basically owned by the Israeli government. So that alone, in my eyes, given the fact that Netanyahu, in my eyes, is a mass murderer, is a war criminal, I think his being sentenced as a war criminal was perfectly all right, despite the fact that this court that exists that pronounces these sorts of things is also occupied by somewhat crazy people. Nonetheless, sometimes even crazy people come up with correct judgments in certain cases, and I think in the case of Netanyahu, to refer to him as a person who is engaged in genocidal activities is perfectly all right, and I don't think anybody who ever defends this person and receives $1 million prize from this person out of his hands is disqualified as a libertarian. The name of libertarians will be ruined forever given this type of event. Now I want to come briefly to the economic arguments that I have against him, and there Saif and Alessandro will supplement me. The most important promise that he made and the most important issue that we as libertarians have is we have to get rid of the central bank. When he gave his speeches at various places in Davos and then before the United Nations and so forth, incidentally, the speech that he gave before the United Nations was largely plagiarized from some TV show. Entire paragraphs were identical from what TV shows had that he presented at the United Nations. So his biggest applause at the European ceremonies, the places where they celebrated him, was always, and I will close the central bank, and this is something that is unconditional, that must be done. That is the most important thing I want to do. Now, of course, he did not close the central bank. When I attacked him for this, he said, if I would close the central bank, this would lead to hyperinflation. Now, I thought that was a truly astonishing statement. He called me an idiot because I made this statement. Now imagine you stopped simply printing any peso. The existing pesos still are there. How can that result in hyperinflation? This is pure magic to think that. The people could use, no person in the world ever looks at what is the balance sheet of the central bank or something like this. You could have used your pesos just like you could have used them before. They would have been accepted just as they were accepted before. And the inflation rate would immediately be zero. There would be no inflation anymore. The idea that you have a claim on the central bank if you present a peso, that the bank owes you something. That existed, of course, as long as we had the gold standard. Then you presented your peso, and if the peso was indeed covered by gold, then you had a claim to gold. But since the peso is not covered by gold, if you go to the central bank of Argentina and say, here I have a peso, no, make that good, give me something for it. They would just declare you, are you nuts? I remember Stephen Kinsella told me, he did that, he went to the British central bank with a pound note, because it says the bearer of this note is entitled to a pound of sterling or something like this. And of course, as far as I know, Stephen did not receive a pound of sterling. They simply just said, there must be something wrong with you that you think this. And if we now look at what happened to the money supply, people hail him for bringing down the inflation rate from whatever 200% to 30–40% rate. That is magic. Who has ever done anything like that before? There are many examples where they have done that before. Saif will tell you that happened in Lebanon also. Actually, they got it down from 100% to 14%, and there was no Milei at work. There was war during that time in Lebanon. When the Americans occupied Iraq, they shut down the central bank, and whatever the name of the
dinar, the Iraqi dinar.
Dinar,
yes.
Yeah, and the dinar actually increased in value. So to claim that it is a great achievement to bring down the inflation rate to 30–40% per year, that is a fantastic achievement, indicates just that these people have absolutely no idea about how the world works. In fact, the money supply under Milei has increased by more than practically by any of his predecessors. And now I will give the word to Saif, because he has these numbers more at his fingertips to indicate what type of disaster, economic disaster, this man committed in less than 2 years. So Saif, please, you take the microphone.
It's working?
Just press the button.
Hello. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Hello? Is it working now? No?
Working?
Hello? 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 It's on. Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Hans, for that wonderful summation of the situation. Of course, I think I agree with you entirely on everything that you said. On the particular issue of the economic miracle that Milei has achieved in Argentina, it is a miracle of sorts because you think you've seen it all in Argentina, but he really managed to increase the money supply in ways that he graduated Argentina to Venezuelan levels in terms of the increase in money supply. He makes all of the previous Argentinians before him look like amateurs. And this is one thing that I've been following since he got into office, because initially he said he was going to close the central bank. Then suddenly we realized, no, it's too important we can't close the central bank. We have a plan for transitioning away from the central bank. And then that keeps dragging on. But ultimately, I think now the dust is beginning to clear up and we're beginning to see what's left of the wreckage. I think we can see the general outlines of what happened was that he got into power and he kept the government bonds Ponzi going and thought that he could somehow maybe manage to keep it sustainable if he just manages to cut enough from government spending. And so the idea was that he would try to bring in the government spending down. This is maybe the most charitable possible interpretation of his intentions, although probably doesn't deserve it given what we've seen with him with the shitcoins and all the other corruption scandals. But possibly that was maybe the intention there. But of course it's completely unsustainable because the interest that he's paying on the government bonds is enormous. And essentially he's just saddling future generations with enormous amounts of debt in dollars in order to pay people to buy Argentinian bonds, which pay exorbitant interests. And so he's destroying the currency in order to pay the interest on this debt. And it's just taking away all of the wealth that is held in the hands of Argentinians and putting it in the hands of the people who are able to play the carry trade. And that's just accumulating many, many more billions of dollars of debt. And initially, he got something like 20 billion from the IMF, 12 billion from the World Bank, and then another 10 million from the Inter-American Development Bank. And that supposedly helped stabilize the currency because he was using those reserves to defend the currency and make a market in the currency. And then they said that they were going to stabilize it somewhere between 1,000 and 1,400, roughly. And now it's gone beyond that because they keep printing more and more of the currency. And so now it's over 1,500 and they're running out of reserve. And now he's in the US sometime in the next couple of days, apparently looking for just $30 billion of debt from the US, on top of all of the many billions of dollars that are already there. And he's open about the fact that he needs them because they need to make the payments on the bonds, which are coming due in 2026, which is essentially just giving out free money for people who are playing the carry trade, who are playing the casino of taking the risk on when the government is going to default. And it's burdening the country with much more debt for generations, and it's destroying the currency. And the summation of all of this, you can see it just simply from the money supply statistics. The M0, M1, M2, and M3, all of them are up several multiples. They're all up more than 100% in less than 2 years. And that's primarily gone, I think, to finance this bond carry trade. And it's completely unsustainable. And I think one more thing I'd like to add is that I think this is just an incredibly pernicious and stupid, really, understanding of libertarian ideas, in the sense that we're going to cut pensioners, we're going to cut all that we can from government spending, but we're going to be paying billions of dollars to bond speculators, because that's somehow more important, and that's somehow so much more sacred, because of the market and the markets. But you're breaking a contract toward people when a lot of these pensioners put in the money and they expect some sort of return on it because they were promised it by the government. And the bond is just another contract, so it is a default either way. But the choice to make that default so tragic and so important, and that it is necessary somehow to pay all of these billions of dollars every year to people playing this carry trade to keep the government currency alive, to keep the government bond market alive, it's, I believe, completely nonsensical. I don't think there's any justification for the enormous cost. And if this was not taking place, the bottom line is that there were tens of billions of dollars in physical cash in Argentina up until a couple of years ago. And part of the scam of saying that, we are the free market administration and we are going to bring in the libertarian free market here, was that it tricked some poor Argentinians to taking that money and putting it in the bank. And they removed the taxes on it. They said there's not going to be taxes on it, so come and put your money in the banks. That was the only thing they liberalized, basically. You giving them their money. You giving them your money. That was the only thing that was made easy. You gave them your money, and then they run the banking Ponzi on top of it. And now it's enormous, and now it requires more and more bailouts. And it's just piling on debt. And it's tragic because this is just the last thing Argentina, of course, needs is more tens of millions, billions of dollars of debt right now, but that's what they're getting, tragically.
I have the chart here, for instance, about money supply increase comparing Venezuela under Maduro and Milei, and you can see it is exactly the same. So he has about the same quality as a monetary theorist as Mr. Maduro in Venezuela, who I have not heard anybody who claimed that Maduro was an Austrian economist. But the increase in the money supply is roughly the same. Alessandro will probably have some interesting to say about who Mr. Milei is and how he rose to power.
Yes, I think this is a very interesting part of the whole story about Mr. Milei. Milei rose to big notoriety and prominence a few years ago through television. Significantly, he was a regular guest in talk shows in Argentina, and the TVs belonged to some big entrepreneurs, among them some Jewish entrepreneurs. This is perfectly legitimate, but Milei was basically invented as a public person. So they somehow discovered him, and he was wildly successful as a TV show guest because he was he used to be very rude, very offensive, and this is what gives you a big success on TV. He was always fighting with leftists. And he started asserting himself as a libertarian, as a friend of the Austrian school, and as an expert of the Austrian school, and as an expert economist. And his public image was, I am so fed up by these socialist policies that I am asserting true economics and that I'm trying to get back to the public discourse the ideas of Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard, meanwhile launching insults and offenses at his opponents on these TV shows. But in fact, he was quite successful and quite funny as well. If you look at his old videos, they're funny. In fact, his supposed knowledge of the Austrian school comes from a legend-like history, because the story goes that he discovered Rothbard, and then he started reading all these books around the year 2013. It's interesting because in 2013 he published an article where he hailed Ben Bernanke as the greatest central banks of history ever and the savior of the American economy during the financial crisis. So this is quite a conversion from this position to Austrian economics, but okay, I think most of us have experienced some sort of transition from mainstream to libertarianism, so why not? his close friend and associate during this time was another guy who is in fact an Austrian economist and who is an expert on Austrian economy. And my guess is that what Milei knows about Austrian economics comes from this guy whose name is Diego Giacomini, and he in fact knows a lot about Austrian economics. And they shared, they wrote books together, and they made theater shows together where they tried to teach people these ideas, and they were quite successful. And for a certain time, they shared our libertarian dislike for politics. And this was quite obvious in what they said and what they did. Then, all of a sudden, after the COVID crisis, just another information, COVID lockdowns, regulations in Argentina were among the worst possible in the world. The people were locked up in their homes for more than a year, and Milei, of course, was one of the most vocal critics of these policies, but strangely enough, not so much of vaccination policies. There he was a little bit more lukewarm, let's say. But still, okay, he rose even more to prominence and notoriety during the COVID time until, very surprisingly, he decided to candidate for the Congress, for the Argentinian parliament. And that's where his association with Diego Giacomini broke up, because Giacomini told him, this is too much. We are libertarians. We are against politics, against the government. So they had a big fight, and from there on, this association broke up. And I think this is my interpretation, at least. The close contact of Milei with ideas of Austrian school economics went lost because he lost his teacher, and from then on until his candidacy for the presidency in Argentina and what is happening now, what happened around Milei became more and more strange. Of course, he continued with this, showing that he was for liberal or libertarian policies. His idea that he described quite in detail during interviews is, I want to become president because my idea is that I will implement minarchist policies in the short run and anarchist policies in the long run. He often said, I am an outsider, I am not a politician, I will get into the presidency in order to destroy the state from inside. So quite a program from a libertarian point of view. And he said the things that Hans mentioned: I will shut down the central bank, I will reduce and then abolish most taxes, I will abolish regulations. In short, I will build in a short time a minimal state, let's say around the ideals of the night watchman state, and then this will help us in the long run to do without the state and to build this anarchist free society. So the dream of a libertarian come true. And he was elected because this was so new for the Argentinians. Of course, the majority of Argentinians don't know anything at all about Austrian economics, libertarianism, as it's usual everywhere in the world. But it was new. And it was used because it was appealing. The Argentinians had two, let's say, classical liberal governments in the past, the experience of Menem in the 90s and the experience of Macri in the 2000s. Both ended in disaster. And so coming up with a new classical libertarian politician would have been a problem in Argentina. So my take is that someone who is behind Milei thought, okay, let's try with this new trick. Let's try with libertarianism. And he was widely successful. He was elected into office. And since he came into office, as Hans and Saif already described, he didn't do anything of what he mentioned. I just will mention a few things and then I will leave space to the others. For example, he said, I will reduce the number of ministries. There's a famous video where he stands in front of a board and he takes away the tags of the names of the ministries and shouts afuera, so out. We don't want these ministries anymore. This was just a show. It reminded me of similar shows that our Mr. Berlusconi made on TV. He was even more successful than Milei. He said wonderful things. You will have a liberal revolution. I will abolish all taxes. He signed a giant contract with the Italians promising wonderful things, and then he didn't do anything of that. But he was a successful showman, as I fear Milei is as well. The ministries, of course, they were reduced, but it's mostly a scam because most abolished ministries were transformed into subsecretaries or something like that. So most of the bureaucracy is still there, although he reduced it a little bit. He reduced regulations. As far as the taxes are concerned, if you see Milei on TV, he has both arms. And this should strike you as strange because he said, I'd rather cut an arm instead of raising taxes. He did raise taxes, and so he should be without an arm. He could choose if it's the left or the right. There he didn't commit to it, but still that's strange. Another thing, and I will end with this, he said, we will shut down the equivalent of the Argentinian IRS, the Finanzamt would be in Germany, the tax agency which recovers taxes. So from a libertarian point of view, another dream come true. They closed the tax agency, so there's no one anymore to extort taxes from the people. In fact, they just changed the name. And then they said, yes, we make a new tax agency. They changed the name, and it will be less corrupt and more efficient. And this is very bad from a libertarian point of view, to have an efficient tax agency which is able to get all the taxes from the citizen and to do it justly and to apply the rules exactly. It's way worse than having the old corrupt agency where maybe with a couple of $100 you could solve the problems. And so, and another thing about the new agency, the tax agency in Argentina couldn't seize bank accounts. This was a very good thing because bank accounts were protected from the greedy hands of the tax collectors. And in May this year, they made it legal again. They can seize your bank accounts, but they say this is done correctly because you will have a notice and you have 48 hours to pay your taxes, and then they will seize the bank account. So they say this is very correct and we are sticking to the rules. And so this is the libertarian president. I have big doubts that there is anything libertarian in what Milei is doing. And so what we can say, he was just a regular politician. So he lied during the campaign. They all lied during the campaign. They promised wonderful things. And then when he was in office, who cares about what I promised, and I do the policies that usual politicians do, and among them printing money and taking advantage of the inflationary tax.
Yeah, as far as efficiency of tax collection is concerned, Murray Rothbard always mentioned, would you rather have an efficient concentration camp or a corrupt concentration camp? And obviously we would prefer a corrupt concentration camp over an efficient one. Of course we would prefer a corrupt tax collecting agency over a truly efficient tax collection agency. He also announced big time that he was increasing his collaboration with the FBI in order to teach the Argentinians how to effectively spy on their own population and cut down crime and behavior that he didn't like. So, and you know roughly what the FBI, what the function of the FBI is in the United States. So he learned from the FBI and is still learning from the FBI how you mistreat your own population in a more efficient way. The fact that he considers tax to be robbery, which is the standard libertarian line, taxes are robbery. He doesn't recognize that increasing the debt implies a tax imposed on your own population. Obviously, the debt has to be repaid. How is the debt repaid? The debt is repaid only by taxing your own population in order to repay your debt. So he lied repeatedly on either taxation is robbery and I will never raise taxes. He raised not only taxes officially, openly, saying such and such a tax will be raised. He introduced several new taxes. And he increased the debt load in a tremendous way. Interestingly, his defenders, they never look at the decisive statistics anymore. They only look at what is the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. And as I said, if you increase the money supply, not all the increase in the money supply goes immediately into the consumer goods market and shows up in the Consumer Price Index. You can, for instance, everybody familiar with Austrian business cycles theory knows, for instance, that the money can also go into asset prices. It does not have to show up immediately in Consumer Price Index. And of course, it can go into buying foreign currencies in order to prop up the reserves of the central bank. There are all sorts of things that you can do with the increased money supply. Also, for instance, doing this, financing this carry trade that goes on there, where by and large Argentinians had huge amounts of dollars. They saved in dollars. All their calculations was in terms of dollars, and what he achieved was, in a way, lying to the public: give your dollars back into the banking system, and I will reward you then with enormous yields on government bonds. Saif knows better with how this carry trade works than I do. The last thing I want to say on this subject is he also increased his spending on military, especially on spying organizations. His information systems received far more generous funding than they received before. Let me see if have we anything else that we need to get rid of here on the Milei question. Okay.
Maybe I could add just a final note. I think the big problem is we are witnessing something which happened exactly with the liberal movement. Rothbard has written very, I think, immortal pages on this. The liberals in the 18th and 19th century were the radicals, were the ones who wanted uncompromising individual freedom. And the term liberal was hijacked by the other political parties And nowadays, liberal doesn't mean anything, or it's just one of the various brands of socialism that we have. And my fear is that the same is happening with the term libertarianism. If you look at the Spanish press, in Argentina, 100%, but also in the rest of the Spanish press, and so we're speaking about almost the half world which speaks Spanish, the term libertarian is always associated with Milei. The party of Milei is called the Libertarians. And this is, in my opinion, very dangerous to our movement. It's highly offensive because we don't deserve to be associated with someone like Milei. And this robs us again of our name, because in a few years we might be in the position to need to justify ourselves with the people saying, "Oh, you're libertarians. You are the ones who are exactly like Milei," and we will need to say, "Yes, but this was not true libertarianism as the socialists say." And this is the biggest risk. There's a risk of communication and of dilution of the term libertarian, and maybe sooner or later we will need to find another term. And there are others. We can say we are ANCAPs or private law society, as Professor Hoppe often proposed. But libertarianism is short, it's effective, and it harkens back to the tradition of the anarchists of the past centuries. And so losing this term is very bad, and the responsibility is only Milei's and his political movements.
If I may just, I think that's a great point that Alessandro brings up. And I think one very important part of the issue with him breaking his pre-election promise, which I think is good that a lot of Austrians at least said, you know, this guy is a scammer, clearly, is that the closing of the central bank is not some side issue for a libertarian. It's not some kind of issue on which you could maybe compromise or you could maybe have it. That's the whole point. That's it. If there's a central bank, the libertarian agenda is over. The government has a central bank. It can print money. It can do whatever it wants. It's got unlimited power over society. And so this isn't one of these ministries he dragged off the board when he said afuera. This isn't just any one of these, you know. It's not like the sports ministry or whatever else he was going after. This is the root of the problem. And the sad thing is, him and a lot of his fans have turned this into some kind of anti-purity test. Well, you know, you need to be practical and you need to be in the political game, so you need to take it, you need to be a little bit more realistic, which means, you know, maybe we can't just shut down the central bank right now. And if you think that that is necessary, then it is something that is dogmatic. But it's not dogmatic. It's really, I think if you look at what's actually going on, it's very simple. If you're continuing with the printing of the money and with the bond carry trade, everybody who is playing that game is putting their money in the bonds and getting a very high interest rate, something like 60, 70, 80% return per year. And the currency, it's a bet on the devaluation of the currency, because the currency is going to be devaluing something like that, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. So if the currency devalues by less than that, and you can get in and out of dollars, which is what he did recently, then people from all over the world can play this casino. They send money, and as long as the government doesn't collapse, doesn't default, then you're playing the spread. You buy pesos, you buy bonds with the pesos, you get more pesos, and you're hopefully, if the exchange rate doesn't go down too much, you can exchange those pesos for more dollars than you put in. So the whole world is now being able to do this. JP Morgan got in with billions of dollars, supposedly, and got out, and it's since when they got out that this is beginning to fall apart. But closing the central bank is a very simple accounting necessity. The central bank is just bleeding billions of dollars. It took all of that cash that people had, it took all the money from the IMF, and the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, and it's using it to operate this Ponzi scheme. It's very simple. And all of these silly theatrics with the chainsaw and with all of the anti-government rhetoric, it's really meaningless. If you're going to cut down on the government and make the government, even if you did achieve, you know, all of the outsized claims that he claimed to want to do, but which he didn't and he won't, But even if he did, what's the point if you're still bleeding billions of dollars to the carry trade? All of the money and the capital is in the hands of people that are playing a casino, rather than being out there in a productive use, being put into productive use in actual productive businesses. Because you're playing that carry trade, you're losing all that money, you're bankrupting the government, you're putting people into the future debt, and you're taking all of the capital resources away from the hands of the economy. So shutting the central bank is the whole idea. If you don't want to shut it, just don't call yourself a libertarian, and don't pretend that this is anything more than just a continuation of politics as usual for right-wing Argentinian political parties. That's what they do. They come in, they play nice with America, they get a lot of money, and they put it on the tab of the people, and then they get out.
It should also be mentioned that all of his government consists basically of former central bankers. So you can judge the seriousness of his intent of shutting down the central bank by looking at the employees that he hired into his government. He did not need the permission from parliament or anything like this to appoint certain people to governmental positions. In the United States, you sometimes need Senate approval or approval from the House of Representatives or something like this. He did not have this sort of requirement in front of him. He could appoint to government positions whoever he wanted to appoint, and he appointed almost exclusively former central bankers or people who worked for Goldman Sachs or Merrill Lynch or whatever these big American banking houses are concerned. That indicates roughly how serious he is about the plan to shut down the central bank if you hire nothing but former central bankers into these positions. So now let's turn, we can come back to this subject if we come up with any additional information. Our memory is sometimes not as good anymore as it used to be. Now I want to come to the next subject. Also, one of his big friends is Donald Trump. He loves Netanyahu. He loves Donald Trump, which he referred to as a free market, big free marketeer, a representative of Western values, something that I can hardly stand to hear anymore. I do not know what Western values are except LBGT2 or whatever that is. And he considers him a free market person. So maybe Tom can say something about the free market credentials of Donald Trump.
I think Milei is referring to the west side of New York City when he talks about Western values. That's his domain. Well, Donald Trump, I'm glad that the incoherent, drunken communist Kamala Harris did not win the election. So Trump is better than the alternative as far as that goes. But when Trump first came in office, for the first time, the very first speech he made on economics, he went to Lexington, Kentucky, because that was the home of Henry Clay. Henry Clay was the Speaker of the House of Representatives in the 1830s, and so he was in government for a long time. He was the leader of the Whig Party, the American Whig Party, which is different than the British Whig Party. And what the Whig Party stood for was high protectionist tariffs, a central bank, and corporate welfare for railroad and road building corporations. Okay, they were the party basically of mercantilism, of Hamiltonian mercantilism. Alexander Hamilton was the original American mercantilist, and Henry Clay picked up that mantle. And so Trump gave his first big speech idolizing Henry Clay. And so there's nothing free market about that at all. And then when he got elected the second time, when he started talking about economics. He said his new hero was William McKinley. And William McKinley was a president that was assassinated, by the way. He was closely aligned with John D. Rockefeller, who made him governor of Ohio at one point. And, but anyway, William McKinley was in Congress before that, and there was a tariff increase in the year 1890 that was named after him, the McKinley tariff. He was not the president at that time. He became president not too long after that. But it was the McKinley tariff because he was the most vociferous proponent of protectionist tariffs at the time. And this is the man that Trump recently holds up as his role model. So the McKinley tariff was passed in the year 1890. And as a result of that, the Republican Party went from a majority to a 3-to-1 minority in the House of Representatives, and McKinley himself was voted out of office. And so this is what Trump thinks is success. And Rockefeller resurrected McKinley, made him governor of Ohio, and then got him elected president after that. So that's what we're looking at in terms of free market. It's a farce. And as far as the tariffs are concerned, 2 years ago, the average tariff rate in America on imports into America was 2%, the average. Trump wants the average to be a minimum of 20%. It's a 10 times multiple of the average tariff rate as a minimum there. And he's created tremendous uncertainty all over the planet with his constant changing and talking about 50% tariff on one country, 100% tariff on China, and all that. And so business people in the United States and elsewhere sit on their hands to a large extent and wait before they make big decisions on big investments with so much uncertainty. I'm not saying they all do, but it's had that effect. Bob Higgs used to calls that regime uncertainty. And so Trump comes in and he hires Elon Musk to try to do something about the bureaucracy. And you all probably read about Elon Musk and what he was doing with interesting. I think his organization was called the Dodge, or DOGE, something like that. But while he was doing it, and so here we are, Elon Musk is saying we're going to fire 10,000 bureaucrats from this agency and 100,000 from that agency, and on, and Trump is cheering him on, and all his supporters are cheering him on, doing that. And then Trump starts raising tariffs, and he's been on American television for months now bragging, we are taking in so much more money in tariff revenue. It's great. It's a great thing. And of course, that revenue goes into the Treasury and it fuels the bureaucracy. So he's out there bragging about how much bigger the bureaucracy is now because of all this tariff revenue that's being taken in. And he absolutely denies that American consumers are paying any of the tariff. He has all his minions out there on television, podcasts, everywhere, saying, see that? You know, the price of cars has not gone up in the past week. It's succeeding. Another dangerous thing he's doing is he's using federal tax dollars to buy into shares of corporations. When a Japanese corporation bought U.S. Steel, Trump, I think he called it some kind of a golden parachute or golden piece of the company, where he says if these Japanese corporation does things that the Trump administration or any future administration disagrees with, the government can intervene and take over the management decisions of that company. That's fascism. That's exactly what economic fascism was in the early 20th century. And so he's literally nationalizing corporations by doing that. And so how is that conducive to libertarianism or free markets, free enterprise, and so forth? And of course, if everybody knows, he sounded like Ron Paul for a while when he was talking about getting us out of the wars, bringing the soldiers home, ending the interventions in the Middle East and all that. And then, of course, one of the first things he does is to keep sending more bombs and more fighter jets to Israel and more military aid, they call it, to the Ukraine to kill more Russians. And so that hasn't changed at all as far as that goes. And he's badgering the Fed to inflate more. He's a real estate developer. He's a real estate developer who all throughout his career made a lot of money during the boom part of the business cycle with artificially low interest rates caused by the Fed. And he went bankrupt 7 times and was bailed out by billionaires 7 times during his real estate career. So it's been all good for him. Low interest, artificially low interest rates created by the Fed printing money has been a good deal for Donald Trump, and he wants more of that. It's not a good deal for me or you, but he turned out okay because of his billionaire connections. And as far as that, probably on the west side of New York, where most of them live. And so, the idea that he's anything at all like he promised, or what Milei has said about him, is farcical. And one quick comment on one of the things you said about Milei is that Americans abolished 3 central banks in our history. The first was called the Bank of North America. It lasted about a year and a half, and it inflated its currency so much no one trusted it. It was privatized. Then there was the first Bank of the United States. Congress defunded it. Then they recreated it to finance the War of 1812. It lasted another 20 years or so. President Andrew Jackson vetoed the refunding of that. So, and in each instance, there was not hyperinflation. So we eliminated 3 central banks, and in fact, it was the opposite. The opposite happened. In fact, Richard Timberlake, a monetary economist, he's retired now, he wrote there are several treatises on American economic and monetary history. Murray Rothbard's great book, Monetary History of the United States. Richard Timberlake wrote one, and Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz wrote another one. In Timberlake's book, he said that the period after this third central bank was abolished was probably the most stable monetary system we had. We're still under the gold standard at that time for the most part, although governments sometimes suspended specie payment during that period. And so there you have it. It's the opposite of what Milei was saying. And maybe I'll end there for now.
Now we get the British view on Donald Trump. Would you be willing to just give us that view?
Oh, to summarize, Britain and America are ruled by a financial oligarchy which extracts vast amounts of various kinds of economic rent from the rest of the world. The function of British and American politicians is to serve the main agenda of this oligarchy, which is to keep things stable in the home countries and to act as enforcement muscle as and when required. After the 1990s, or from the 1990s onwards, the secondary agenda of this oligarchy changed somewhat, or developed. The idea was that the host countries should be weakened in various ways so that there would never be any serious opposition to the work of this oligarchy. And that helps to explain things like globalization, which amounts to the mass export of manufacturing capacity to elsewhere in the world, not simply because it brings in a few profits, but because it destroys an autonomous working class, and the social atomization of the people through things like high immigration in order to break up the solidarity of the governed, to prevent them from putting together a coherent movement of resistance. The idea was that Britain and America would serve as the bases for this kind of global extraction racket, and the more somnolent, the more paralyzed the host became, the better it was for the parasite. What has happened since 2020 is that globalization has become far less stable. Indeed, it is seriously under threat with the rise of China, mainly China, but also Russia. The idea of the Ukraine war was to bleed Russia white and to enable it to be broken up. And then you'd have NATO bases along the north borders of China, and the Chinese would be put back in their box, a useful sweatshop, and that was it. When this failed, the secondary agenda of the British and American ruling class changed. It changed radically. It is necessary now to reindustrialize and to remoralize. It is necessary to revive the host. There's no point being a parasite and a dead host. They do need that enforcement muscle. They need young men willing to join up and to die for their country, or whatever other lie they're told. And that explains the election of Donald Trump the second time round. His job is to clear away the excesses of the last secondary agenda and to implement the new secondary agenda. No longer atomization and paralysis, but, as I said, reindustrialization and remoralization. Now that brings me inevitably to Britain. The Starmer government does not understand that the secondary agenda has changed. It believes that business can carry on exactly as usual, very high levels of immigration, a large and growing police state, and the full agenda as it has been gradually revealed since the 1990s. But that is no longer the agenda, and that explains why the Starmer government, despite its very large majority in Parliament, has been disintegrating during the past year. At the moment, he's losing one important person from his circle every week, most recently Peter Mandelson. What will happen in Britain, I think, is that we shall have something like a Donald Trump. Keir Starmer will go, or at least he'll be nobbled in various ways, and we'll have a new government without the trouble of asking the people to decide, because the people have no decision anyway. This government will talk about and will achieve a certain amount of reindustrialization, a certain amount of social restabilization, just as in America. But to regard this as a populist victory is, I think, almost as short-sighted as hailing Milei as some kind of libertarian messiah. This is not to say that we should scornfully reject everything that's offered to us. We should accept a return to economic growth, a return to real economic growth. We should accept whatever social stabilization is offered to us, but we should use the relaxation of control to make increasingly radical demands for more. You could compare Donald Trump and whoever takes over from Keir Starmer to Mikhail Gorbachev in the 1980s. It was obvious in the middle 1980s that the Soviet Union was disintegrating. It was necessary to make fundamental reforms, not to destroy the structure of communist domination, but to restore Russia as a working economy and society. And that's what Mikhail Gorbachev was put in to achieve. It's just that when you tell people, you can speak your minds to some extent, and we won't put you in lunatic asylums or labor camps, people will not simply say, oh, thank you, Mr. Gorbachev, we love you so much. They'll start asking what happened to their grandparents in the 1930s. They'll start wanting the bodies to be dug up. They'll start asking all sorts of embarrassing questions and suggesting semi-true answers. And the Gorbachev stabilization project ran out of control and the Soviet Union collapsed. And that is perhaps what our response should be to whatever we may get from the so-called populists of the Trump administration and from whatever populists, I use the term in inverted commas, whatever populists take over in Britain over the next few years. Do not suppose that our ruling classes have repented. Do not suppose that they have given up on their long-term project of full-spectrum domination of the world, so that London and New York are the endpoints to various feeding tubes planted in every other economic region of the planet. No, that will continue. It's just that they were rather previous in their views of globalization, whereby the ruling class could float serenely above all national states. Instead, they suddenly need hard muscle, they need boots on the ground, they need young men willing to die for their countries again, and that is what that's what Trump 2 is about. And I don't think we should be under any illusions whatsoever about this. Donald Trump is not a savior, but he's not a complete fraud either, because there will be certain advantages to having the Trump administration above the previous Biden administration. We should be glad of those, but we should never lose sight of the overall agenda, which is still deeply hostile to us and to every other people on this planet who is not part of the parasitic ruling class. That's what I have to say.
I mean, I would emphasize that the virtue of Trump is he ended that wokeness to a certain extent. But we have to balance that against more important aspects, I think. The reindustrialization that he wants to achieve is very doubtful for the reason that Tom mentioned. There is regime uncertainty. Trump is doing this today, tomorrow he had a bad sleep, and he reverses himself on the decision that he made a day before. I think Trump is a man without any principles whatsoever. I'm sure the man never in his entire life read a serious book. He knows nothing about the world, nothing about this country or that country. His dealing with foreign politicians is like threatening them, liking them one day, the next day saying, no, he did not behave the way he should behave, so now I dislike this person. He is full of himself. I mean, if you listen to his speeches, I cannot listen more than 2 minutes for it, because the word great appears there in every second sentence. I am, of course, he is, of course, the greatest deal maker that ever inhabited this world. Elon Musk was, of course, absolutely great until he was no longer absolutely great. Then Zelensky, for a while, was absolutely great, but then, of course, no, he did not behave right, so I have to punish him. Then he had a good conversation with Putin. He said, hey, Putin is a great guy. 1 week afterwards, he said, no, Putin just did this and that, and I'm not very happy about that at all. He increased government debt tremendously again. He is actually more warlike than Biden. Most of the American libertarian-leaning people thought the advantage that Trump would have would be he would certainly bring that Ukraine war to an end. He didn't do anything like it. As a matter of fact, he still keeps funding the Ukraine and sends weapons to the Ukraine. And as far as Israel is concerned, of course, he is worse than Biden. He supports Israel to the hilt. He lets himself persuaded by Israel to also attack a place such as Iran during a time when he himself said, I will meet for peace negotiations with Hamas leaders in in some United Arab country, and while these peace negotiations were supposed to go on, he started bombing Iran, and recently he bombed also Qatar, and the Americans turned off their air defense systems. They have a big base in Qatar. They turned off their defense system in order to allow the Israelis to conduct the attack on some buildings in Qatar where they suspected there would be some Hamas people hiding. He is just as much or even worse of a warrior than the Biden administration, I would say, and pretends that he is a peacemaker. America is responsible or has provoked the entire Ukraine war by expanding NATO further and further to the east, despite the warning from the Russians, come on, don't get too close to us. And now he pretends, even though he funds the Ukraine, now he pretends to be a peacemaker between Ukraine and Russia, even though he is the participant in the war. He also pretends to be a peacemaker between Hamas and Israel, despite the fact that he funds one of these war sites. I should also mention, of course, that Israel was a big funder of Hamas also, in order to reduce the power of the PLO. So from people who were considered to be worthy to be funded by Israel, and indirectly, of course, by the United States, because Israel cannot fund anything without the help of the United States, despite the fact that he funded them, now they pretend they are nothing but evil, and so forth. So you cannot be a peacemaker if you are a participant in the wars. And Trump is a participant in the war in Ukraine, and he is a participant in the war that goes on between Hamas and Israel. So he's an unbelievable person. It doesn't help. We have to just mention these sorts of things. There exist, of course, it might sound like a conspiracy here, but there exists an interesting connection between all of them. Milei was funded by the Jewish oligarchs in Argentina. He is a creation of the Jewish oligarchs in Argentina. Trump would not have won his election if he would not have been helped by people like Miriam Edelson and the widow of Sheldon Edelson and major Jewish donors in the United States. And Zelensky, of course, is a creation of Jewish oligarchs in the Ukraine. In this sense, there is some sort of weird alliance going on where it is difficult to predict what the ultimate outcome will be, but these are, I think, not accidental type of things. Otherwise, it would make no sense. So yes, they are all related to each other by certain donor class that funds all of them, that funds Trump, that funds Zelensky, and that funds Milei as well. As far as the possibilities of creating peace in Europe, I mean, we are the most important things for libertarians is we want peace. We are the anti-war party. I do not see any end of these wars anywhere. Even though the Americans provoked the war in in the Ukraine, and got the Europeans as members of NATO, as allies, supporting them in this endeavor. In the meantime, the Europeans are even worse than the Americans. As I said in my speech, Germany, today a German politician, for instance, demanded that if there is any Russian airplane only driving through the airspace of Estonia or Poland for 1 second, we should shoot it down. That is even further than Trump himself would go in this regard. So Trump moderates right now an even more belligerent Europe. England is actually the most terrible country when it comes to this warmongering. And Germany is the second worst place. We are now, as I said yesterday, we are supposed to be getting ready for war. I do not think that will happen, but in order to distract from domestic difficulties that they have, Germany is is a declining country in economic terms. In order to distract people's attention from the domestic problems that they have, it is always good to build up a huge enemy outside, and that happen to be the Russians. The Russians right now, they are the perfect excuse not to solve the problems that you have internally and ruining your own the German economy. To distract attention from that, you need an enemy. I guess Britain is in a similar situation. France is in a similar situation. All of these European countries, they are overblown welfare states that are on the verge of going bankrupt. And the best way to just draw the attention of people onto other things is to just paint up some huge danger coming from Russia, and then once we are done with Russia, then it will be going on to China. Coming back briefly to Milei, in a Turkish paper, English Turkish paper, they say you know that Milei in that recent election in the Buenos Aires province, he was crushed. So he's now facing another election in a month or so, and in order to prevent being crushed again, he proposed now to do this. An unusually conciliatory sounding Milei said he would increase pension spending by 5%, health care by 17%, education by 8%, disability pensions by 5% above inflation. Now, this sounds like what every social democrat in Europe says when they want to be elected. We spend more on education, we spend more on health care, we spend more on old people and so forth. This doesn't sound exactly like a free market type of guy. He sounds like a regular social democrat. They always promise these types of things. So you see, even Turkey takes note of Milei, and they are proud of the fact that their inflation rate is just about the same as it is in Argentina. It also runs between 30 and 40%, and I'm telling you, 30 and 40% inflation rate is a disaster. You cannot do any planning whatsoever with inflation rates like this. But when it comes, nobody in the rest of the world would say that Erdogan, the Turkish government is just magnificent achievements. They have inflation rates between 30 and 40%. But if we observe that Milei has that 30-40%, that is magic. The man is just Jesus walking on water, something like this. But as I said, nobody in Turkey thinks that he is walking on water. that came just out of two days ago in the Turkish paper. I was surprised that his fame even spread all the way to our towns here, but I thought that was worth mentioning. With respect to finding a peaceful solution, Sean had some interesting ideas about what we should do with Gaza and ending the conflict in the Middle East. Would you be willing to just...
The proposal in brief, which will never be adopted, is that Israel should be given complete title to everything it has conquered and everything it can conquer in the near future. In return for that, the Israelis should be required to pay full compensation to those people displaced. The compensation will be collected by the United Nations, which will require its member states to impose tariffs on Israeli imports for the next 50 years. And the whole thing can be funded by bonds sold on the basis of those tariffs. It means that Israel will get something like its greater Israel. It'll have Gaza, it'll have the West Bank, it may even take bits of Lebanon and Syria, I don't know, but the Israelis should be made to pay for the resettlement of people displaced and the genuine rebuilding of their lives. At the moment, I believe the Israelis are offering people $5,000 in order to go. I'm thinking of compensation considerably above that level. I think, if tried, this might well bring about a stable solution to a problem which has been continuing for at least 100 years, but of course I don't believe it will be tried. I think we shall just drift further into instability. If I could come back to what I was saying earlier, though, things do not happen smoothly because there is no single conspiracy in charge. I suspect that the ruling class in Britain and America, and Britain is very much Robin to America's Batman, I think there has been a change of agenda, change of secondary agenda in Britain and America in the ruling classes. But the frontmen, the politicians, the bureaucrats, the opinion formers, they are not under total control. They are given a great deal of operational freedom. Most of them are not particularly competent. And so the agenda was this: you preserve unipolar hegemony by destroying Russia and breaking it up, and by forcing the Chinese to roll over. When that failed, when it turned out that we couldn't make many weapons, and the weapons we did make weren't very good, and we just didn't have the kind of reach we thought we did, or they didn't have the reach they thought they did, then the agenda had to pivot. The only way to re-establish unipolar hegemony is by fighting a long Cold War against China. In order to do that, you do need functional Western societies. But the people given the job of bringing these about are just not terribly competent, in the same way that Gorbachev was told, revive the Soviet Union, stabilize it, stop it from collapsing. But the means he chose to that end were a disaster. And so Trump's tariffs, they are supposed to bring about a reindustrialization of America, but they won't, because the whole thing is so incompetent. And so we shall see a great deal of turbulence over the next few years as different approaches are tried. I also do suspect that Israel will be thrown under the bus because it is a complication in the implementation of this secondary agenda. The politicians there appear to be so crazy that they are beyond all rational control, and so Israel will be taken down a peg, I think. It's very difficult to imagine that they will be allowed to get away with the public mass murder of women and children on this scale. But that is a suspicion. We're entering a period of instability because human affairs are not exactly like iron filings on a piece of paper. As you move the magnet underneath, so the iron filings reconfigure themselves. Human affairs do not move as smoothly and predictably as that. The secondary agenda has changed, reindustrialization, remoralization, but nobody knows exactly how to bring this about. And so we are seeing various experiments to this end, and as those experiments fail, something else will be tried. It may be that the whole project fails, it will collapse in disaster, or perhaps some reasonably efficient means will be found in the next 5 to 10 years. It's too early to say, but the long leftist hegemony that we saw between the 1990s and last year is coming to an end because it no longer fits in with the primary objective of those Western elites, which is to preserve unipolar hegemony.
Saif, can you say a few words about how you think that things will play out in the Middle East?
Well, I think if we go back to the discussion of Trump and his foreign policy, I think it's quite indicative, just like with Milei, when he went on his Twitter account and promoted a shitcoin scam, and people invested in it, and they lost tens of millions of dollars, and him and his buddies made tens of millions of dollars. And the thing is still being investigated. He may not yet get away with it. But so far, I think what we can know, whatever ends up happening with it legally, I think this is an extremely telling act when you engage in shitcoining. You introduce a currency that you make out of thin air, and then you sell it to people, and then you disappear. You dump the thing that you produce, so the price of the currency collapses. All of these meme coins, they all function in the same way. They are just a mechanism for the person who makes them to steal money. But Trump did this as well, and I think that's also quite indicative of the kind of person Trump is. There is a certain amount of high time preference that is required in order to be taking part in shitcoining like this. Essentially, you have fame, you have credibility, people know you. You monetize on that by producing a currency that you can produce at will, and then you dump it onto them and you make money. So effectively, you're burning credibility in order to make money today, which is a very short-termist and arguably also very immoral thing to do. And I think the short-termist aspect of it is very telling. I think this is essentially how Trump is being used in his presidency. He's thinking in this very high time preference way. So he's willing to endanger long-term relationships that are important for the United States in search of a quick buck, because this is the kind of time preference that he has to this job. And I think if you look around the way that he's been acting on the global stage, the tariffs, all of this stuff, I think it's highly misguided if it's actually intended to produce the outcomes that he says it is intended to produce. But it's also indicative of a deep misunderstanding and almost delusional understanding of economics and also the state of the world, because he seems to think that China is still in 1996, where they are producing, cheap T-shirts, and if they don't sell their cheap T-shirts in Walmart in the U.S., Chinese children will go hungry. It seems that that is his model of the Chinese economy, and the Chinese economy has changed enormously over the last 30 years. China is not a cheap workshop. China is the world's industrial superpower by far. I mean, by any metric, if you think about in terms of the production of steel, the production of energy, the consumption of energy, the industrial output, China far outpaces the US in all of those things. China's industrial output is larger than the US, Europe, and Japan combined. It is the major producer of almost all of the imported economic goods in the world today. And the US is about 2.7%. All of the US imports from China are 2.7% of China's GDP. So I think there's there's a highly misguided element to this kind of, we're going to fight the trade war with China mentality, where we're going to bring them to heel because we are the United States. This is somebody still living in the 1980s and 90s. And I think it's extremely dangerous because this isn't just true in terms of economics. I think it's also true in terms of the military. I think he also vastly underestimates China's military capabilities, because in the same way that, you know, they have extremely advanced technology in all aspects of consumers goods, they're also doing similar things with military capabilities. And I think if he continues to be pushed toward being hostile toward China, it's really worrying, and it's worrying because there seems to be an agenda, just like there was an agenda for a war with Iran, there seems to be an agenda for a war with China. So it seems like this is something that has wind in its sails, and it's continuing to grow. The US hostility to China continues to increase with the trade war and with all kinds of other policies and rhetoric from the Trump administration. But I think it's also an extremely high time preference, an extremely misguided decision.
I was also curious what you think will play out in Gaza, West Bank, Israel. So will there be a solution, or will there be something like happening that Sean just talked about? I think that is also very unrealistic that that Israel will pay compensation or anything like this. But what is your prediction will happen there?
It's really depressing to think about it, because ultimately, from the U.S. perspective, from the Israeli perspective, they are on a mission to kill as many people and expel as many people and to take as much land as they can. This is essentially, the motto of Zionists has always been more land and fewer Arabs. This is what they want to do: try and get as much land as possible, try and kick out as many natives as possible. And the last 2 years have been a massive carte blanche for that. It's just take it to extreme, and to a level of complete devotion among the population and among the government, that it is a priority ahead of everything. So it looks pretty bleak. They are going to continue to murder as much as they can, to expel as much as they can in Gaza, and also in the West Bank they're beginning to do the same thing. They're confiscating the land there, and I think it's difficult to imagine somebody being able to stop them, because they have the U.S. and nobody wants to pick a war with the U.S. and they completely, essentially control the U.S. But I think the dangerous thing, perhaps, is that they are being extremely aggressive toward the rest of the neighborhood as well, in a way that is making everybody become naturally hostile to them. Because, I think that particularly with the last few weeks when they bombed Qatar, Qatar, is very different from the other countries in that it's not taking part in any kind of military attacks on Israel. It's not involved in, and it doesn't really have any kind of legitimate pretext for being attacked. But what this is showing is that basically going along with Israeli plans is not a viable strategy for countries in the region. And I think more and more are beginning to think of this, and I think it's they're going to try and press on the countries surrounding them to take the refugees as well, and that's going to create some aspect of conflict. But it doesn't look good for the people who are living there. Unfortunately, it's a horrible tragedy.
Alessandro, can we put any hope into Meloni?
No, not at all. I was thinking about a famous phrase by Karl Marx. He said, history usually repeats itself, first time in tragedy, second time in comedy. And so I was thinking about the last term of the title you gave this discussion, the clowns, and Meloni, Milei, Trump, they belong to this vast category of clowns, respecting clowns who do a very honorable job. They work in the circus, they sell their services, children laugh when they do their tricks. So clowns are very honorable persons, and that's the big difference with politicians. No, there is no hope in Meloni, and I would like to highlight a possible development, for we are trying to speculate what will happen in the future. I think that the Milei experiment could be repeated, and maybe Meloni is something similar, or there will spring up new small Mileis somewhere. The problem is this: the leftist establishment has lost all its credibility. They know it perfectly. People don't believe them anymore, and so something new is needed. And they need to present someone to the electorate who says sensible things. Nowadays, it's if you say there are two genders, two sexes, male and women, it's already something revolutionary. But still, people can think, oh wow, here we have someone who says something which has common sense. And so my prediction is that there will come up new little Mileis in the next years who will probably do the same job as Milei in Argentina. And meanwhile, we need to be distracted from what is really going on. And I was thinking about the Trump administration. The biggest development is connected, I think, with this huge technocratic class who is trying to take over the United States. We have this giant corporation, Palantir, which is a totally artificial company. I read that Palantir made losses for 17 years in a row. So they are a creature of the governments or of the central banks. And these people are taking over a global surveillance system. And this is funny as well. It's the same thing which is going on in Europe, because the European Union would like to set up something similar. And so you see, apparently they are at odds. Trump hates Ms. von der Leyen, but then they are implementing the same agenda, and this is very dangerous, I think. In a way or another, they are trying to accomplish their goals, maybe changing some political slogans and showing that there is a new guy and that this time we will have the right politician, the one who solves the problems. But still, the real problem is always the same. Politics is a crooked game. They are just criminals. In fact, Milei repeats it time and again. States are criminal organizations, politicians are criminals. So he is maybe one of the most successful criminals. He says it of himself as well. So I don't know if there is a good outlook. I think the best we can do is going on with the battles we always fought. They are very hard battles. They are very slow. We can try to win hearts and minds. And this is the most important thing we can do, because if the more persons we win to the cause of freedom, of individual liberties, and this time we have very young guys at the conference which give me hope, the more we can think to affect a change. In fact, all these elites are composed of people who have been around a long time. Maybe the younger generations could try to understand something about freedom. It's hard. It's very hard to get to the people, because we are faced with a huge propaganda apparatus which dominates social media, TV, newspapers, and so on. But still, I think we can do our little job of showing what is happening. And once you start gaining consciousness about what is happening, this is the first step towards a way, a path to personal freedom and maybe freedom of our societies.
Apropos Palantir, 10 years ago or so, or more than 10 years ago, I was invited to see Peter Thiel. So he flew me to San Francisco. My wife went there, and he was surrounded by his lawyers and advisors. And he had read my democracy book and wanted to get to know me, and presented himself as a libertarian. And in a way, how you can get fooled. So I thought he would be a potential libertarian, being useful. I invited him to come to this conference. He said, oh yes, I will come to this conference. When that was publicized, then all of a sudden I got requests from the New York Times, from the London Times, if they could also come to this conference. I immediately declined, and then it turned out that Thiel sent me a note saying, you know, I am I'm actively engaged in the election campaign of Trump, the first one in 2016. I think if I come to your conference, that would hurt the prospects of Trump, because you are considered to be radioactive. So you see, in a way, I'm guilty for the fact that Trump was elected. If Thiel had come here, he might have become a regular libertarian, but that was not what actually turned out to happen. So I was fooled by some people who thought were of great potential, and turned out to be people who do almost the opposite of what I stand for. And I guess a person like Milei also succeeded in fooling many people into believing that he was something that he in fact is not. I'm still frequently mentioned when it comes to articles where they report about this danger of Palantir and the Dark Enlightenment. I also, at that meeting with Peter Thiel, I also met Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin is now one of the most famous conspirators. The New York Times has articles about him. The German Spiegel had an article about Curtis Yarvin and so forth. So I met him, and my name appears always in these articles, mostly written by lefties who think that there is a takeover by these supposedly libertarian technocrats who hang out with Trump and will eventually control the entire world. So I'm the one who started this whole thing, who had something to do with it. I think we should now open the discussion to the public. Is that all right with you? So, Niklas, can you take another microphone and...
Hello.
Oh, yeah, so do you want to have a bathroom break? Oh, no, should... Yeah, let's have a 10-minute break to go to the bathrooms, and then we meet you in the